Welcome to the Robert Wenzel Show. Please stand by for Robert Wenzel.
Welcome, everyone. This is the Robert Wenzel Show. I'm Robert Wenzel. My guest today on the show is Steve Forbes. He's chairman and editor-in-chief of Forbes Media and an internationally respected authority in the world of economics, finance, and corporate leadership. Steve Forbes campaigned twice for the Republican nomination for the presidency. His previous books include the Wall Street Journal bestseller, How Capitalism Will Save Us. He has a new book out called Freedom Manifesto, Why Free Markets Are Moral and Big Government Isn't. Steve Forbes authored the book with Elizabeth Ames. Steve, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
You know, Steve, I'll tell you, this book absolutely fascinated me. It's awesome because the examples you use, which go beyond explaining how free markets work, but you subtly pop bubbles about Sweden, about Greece, about even the state of Texas and what's going on in Zimbabwe. I think it was just a great book. That said, I have one thing you have in chapter 1 that I have to raise a point about because I think it's off of beat. You talk about Keynes and animal spirits. Specifically, you write, this motivation of individuals and companies to solve problems and meet needs, which Keynes called animal spirits, is at the heart of free enterprise. Now, I have to ask you a question on two parts. First, I think Keynes meant something else. I mean, he really thought that there were animal spirits in people that would overcome, as he put it, mathematical expectations and calculations and economic valuations that drove the economy. He likened it to a trip to the South Pole where you don't calculate, you don't know what's going to happen, but you do it anyways. I happen to think that the key to economics and driving the economy is entrepreneurship, specifically the way it's been discussed by an economist by the name of Israel Kirzner. His thinking is entrepreneurship is about seeing opportunities that are in front of you and grabbing them rather than an animal spirit type thing where you're going out there and you don't know if you're going to make it or not. So help me out here.
I think what Keynes meant, and certainly what we meant, was simply energy and a willingness to take risks and not be foolish about it, not behave blindly, but quite the opposite. Do your prep work, think you see an opportunity, and then as Steve Jobs did, you spend an enormous amount of time, detail, to make the thing happen. So you're spirited in energy, but the exact opposite in terms of having to pay attention to detail to make the thing happen. It's not Hail Mary or just being frisky.
Yeah. No, I think one thing you brought up Steve Jobs, and I think one thing that was misunderstood is really this Kirzner view of entrepreneurship where it's seeing an opportunity. What Steve Jobs really saw at the start was Steve Wozniak, who was a genius as far as a software engineer. Wozniak is the guy that really designed a lot of this stuff. And it was that insight by Jobs of what Wozniak had, and he knew how to take that and market and do other things with it, which Jobs probably didn't think it was that risky. I mean, he knew what Wozniak could do. So, and Kirzner, again, back to the point, because I think he's a very, very important economist, makes the point that in universities, there's too much focus on the idea that risk is involved versus alertness to opportunity. I would even take your grandfather and your father as examples. I mean, your grandfather, when we started the magazine, I mean, there was probably risk in there, but I'm sure, given the success, he understood where he was going and where the revenue generation would come from and all that kind of stuff. And then certainly when your father bought his hot air balloon and his yachts, an outsider might have looked at that as risky, but I mean, your father probably calculated that out in a sense and knew what attention it would bring to Forbes and capitalism and all that kind of stuff. So I think alertness, I mean, you see that in Bill Gates with the operating system. You see that in Warren Buffett. They're not risk takers as much as they are people who are alert to what's already there and just take advantage of it. So anyways, I think that's a difference we have in the book. But beyond that, I'll tell you, you do great stuff. And again, it's the way you pop bubbles. For example, when you're talking about healthcare, you don't really get too much into Obamacare, Will you tell us about what's going on in the UK?
Sure. When government's involved, they deal with the present, and because they lack that entrepreneurial spirit, it creates scarcity. And we have a chapter on this, abundance versus scarcity. And when you have free markets and there's a demand, people figure out ways to meet the demand, or they anticipate the demand. Talking about Steve Jobs again, he had that wonderful phrase where he said, "We don't do marketing surveys because people don't know what they want until we show them." And entrepreneurs putting things out there, and they may or may not be accepted. You don't know until you actually do it. And Steve Jobs had plenty of failures during his lifetime, including, as we know, getting fired from his own company. So when government gets involved in healthcare, what you have is a scarcity, you have higher costs, and you have another country's rationing. When government determines who gets to stand where in line for treatment, then call it what you will. That is government ultimately determining who lives, who doesn't, what kind of care is available, what kind of care is not available, instead of the legitimate play of people deciding for themselves, doctors deciding for themselves. And as you know, Obamacare has this hideous panel of 15 bureaucrats, unelected, unaccountable to Congress. Congress can't touch them. The courts can't touch them under the law the way they wrote it. And they get to determine what are the best medical procedures, which means that they determine what is going to be eligible for care and what isn't, which is absolutely frightening. But that's government. Pessimism, distrust, command from the top, and the passivity from people.
Yeah. Steve, how pessimistic are you about Obamacare? I think it could have the potential to really lower life expectancy in the United States, because it's not going to provide incentive for doctors and technologies.
To be a huge opportunity killer in terms of innovations and in terms of producing what we have. One of the things we point out in the book, Freedom Manifesto, is how FDA regulations, Food and Drug Administration regulations, of drugs that have already been approved by that agency are in short supply, especially in various areas of cancer treatments, because of crazy regulations from the FDA. So again, it's about scarcity, creating scarcity, and then government determining politically who gets it and who doesn't. And this is another reason why we have such nasty politics these days. The bigger government gets, and I want to emphasize, we're talking about big government, not small g government, but the bigger government gets, the more groups that vie for favors from it, the nastier and the more elbow-throwing, jabbing politics becomes.
How close do you think we'll get to Greece? I mean, you make some great points in your book in Greece, where the average government job pays 3 times what it does in the private sector. You quote a finance minister who says that given the salaries for municipal train workers and railroad workers, that you'd be better off, it would be cheaper to put all passengers in taxi cabs. Are we headed that way?
We are. I think one reason why we're going to see some interesting elections is precisely because the American people can see where all of this leads to. And it creates a culture of dependency. It brings about distrust. One of the things a fellow named Michael Lewis, who wrote an article about Greece 2.5 years ago or so, noted about Greece, and we quote him and others, is that it destroys social trust when the government has such a dominant role, because everyone figures the only way you got ahead of me was because you had a better political friend and nothing to do with merit. And so one of the things we discuss in the book is meritocracy versus cronyism. Meritocracy means we the people in the marketplace decide what moves forward and what doesn't. Cronyism means you've got an in with the politicians. They'll take care of you.
Yeah. Now, Steve, another thing I found fascinating was that you pointed out that in Greece, students who go to public schools, the parents, if they want their kids to succeed at all, hire tutors so the kids can actually learn something after school. I mean, it's terrible how these bureaucracies go.
Because again, you please the politicians, not your supposed customers. And you see it here in the U.S. We, as you know, a lot of our K through 12 schools have terrible problems, but yet the government, except for some reform governors we're seeing finally emerge, politicians are more interested in cozying up to the teachers' unions rather than teachers or students.
Right. Now, another bubble I loved that you poked a hole into was in Sweden. I didn't know this, but there's a black market for rental housing. The mainstream media, liberal media, tends to show Sweden as this liberal heaven where central planning works and all that. And your mention of black market on rental housing really threw me there.
Well, when government gets involved, you get shortages. It just creates an environment where people start gaming the system to get what they want. Instead of doing it the honest way, you work for it, you improve your skills, you take on responsibilities, make mistakes, learn from those mistakes, and move up. But when government is involved, you get the exact opposite.
Yeah. Now, the other thing is we have growing regulation in this country that is getting to absurd levels. In your book, you talk about the state of Texas where a computer repair technician is required to purchase a private investigator's license. I mean, how absurd can it get?
It's absurder and absurder.
Yeah.
Sadly, some of the rules are deadly. There was a case of a lifeguard, a kid who saw somebody in trouble, went out and saved the individual, and instead of being praised, the unions berated him, saying, you broke the rules. You went beyond the 1,500 feet or whatever it was, so therefore you're going to lose your job. And the kid said, well, I saved the guy. And they said, yeah, but you broke our rules, so out you go.
Well, going internationally, which you do a number of times, Zimbabwe as an example, and I was not aware of this, that entrepreneurs have to pay government fees that are sometimes 5 times the national per capita income. I mean, how can anybody start a business there? No wonder they're suffering the way they are.
That's right. And it's amazing the number of countries that make it difficult to, unnecessarily difficult to start a legal business. And then they piously wonder why they have a large informal economy. That's one of the problems with Greece. It's one of the problems with Italy. What they should do is follow the example of New Zealand, where you go on a computer, go online, a couple of clicks, you've got a business.
And then you point out Danish unemployment runs for years because people get unemployment benefits for 5 years, and then miraculously, at about 4 years and 8 months, people start finding jobs. I mean, you pay people not to work, and they don't work, and you got a great example there of that.
Well, that's, again, how government undermines individualism initiative, is that it tries to create this sense of dependency. And thankfully, Denmark at least broke away from that part of it. But it's pervasive in all society. You see this, again, trying to game the system.
Mm-hmm. Now, then you also talk about a charity where there was one sort of a transaction between a giver and a receiver, and that's changed now. And, you know, one of the things the president says often when he attempts to defend government getting involved in charity, that it's the neighborly thing to do. My thought has always been, well, if it's the neighborly thing to do, you know, government should stay out of it and neighbors will take care of it. And you do a great chapter there explaining the problems with government getting involved in all this so-called charity work.
Well, what it does is undermine the kind of care and attention charities traditionally took towards helping people in distress. And that is, you, the recipient of the charitable resources, you were expected to do a few things to show you earned this. And that meant getting skills for a job. That meant trying to improve your personal habits and the like, so you could start to become a productive citizen again. So whereas with government, it's just a matter of building power bases, expanding your bureaucracy. And as you know, we cite in the book, there's no correlation between what a bureaucracy is supposed to do and the size that it is created to do the job. And a British historian called C. Northcote Parkinson discovered this back in the 1950s. He was doing a book on the British Navy after World War I, which the Brits won. The Navy was sharply downsized. We didn't think we were going to have any more wars in those days. The Navy was sharply downsized. The bureaucracy, however, that was running the Navy got bigger. As the Navy got smaller, the bureaucracy got bigger. Go figure.
Yeah. Yeah, you make another great point in contrasting the Lumbee Indians, which the government did not, quote, help, and other Indians and how successful they were. I think that's a great example of how government support and help really destroys the fabric of a group.
Yes, and I loved it when John Stossel, we quote him in the book, He quoted President Obama saying, "Oh, we haven't done enough for Native Americans." And Stossel said they should be so lucky
Right.
to help us destroy them.
Now, at another point, you say that Al Gore may become the first carbon billionaire. What's that all about?
It's crony capitalism at its greenest worst. He's with a couple of companies that are invested in things that are backed by the government through government subsidies and the like. So it wasn't as if he went out and did a great new piece of software or hardware or started a great new business. The fact that he's been back in ventures that have a lot of government money and they get rich, and so does he.
Yeah.
Crony capitalism at its worst.
Yeah. Steve, I'll tell you, this is a great book. It helps explain what free markets are about. It uses great examples. It's a great book. But now I want to get into how much of a free market guy are you? For example, what do you think causes the business cycle?
I'm not a believer in business cycles as much as at certain points governments start to make a hash of things. And it's normal. It's normal to have certain areas where people pour a lot of money in because everyone sees opportunity at the same time. Then the thing shakes out and we move forward. For example, in the early 1980s, personal computers were discovered by everyone. Everyone saw this is a big deal. Got to get into this business. And tons of companies did, like Atari and Commodore, that went broke. Some had to merge. Some managed to survive, but most did not. And that, again, is an example of the normal to and fro of a market. We've had over 300 major automobile manufacturers in this country. Today we have about 2.5 left. U.S. born, you might say. We've got a number of foreign manufacturers who are doing very nicely. The bottom line, again, is when government gets involved, you're going to get the things you don't like distrust, scarcity, whereas when you allow free market, free people, there's no telling what they're going to do positively.
Yeah. What do you say about the argument that the central bank, when they increase the money supply, it goes into certain sectors, particularly the capital goods sector, and then you see the booms in real estate and stock markets and things like that. Do you see that as playing a role or causing the business cycle?
Well, a bit. But, each business or sector of the economy has its own ups and downs. And so you ought to see, parts of it flourishing, parts of it contracting, change all the time. But when you get a general economic downturn, it's not that the economy is tired. It's that politicians are messing things up again.
Yeah. But, do you think the central bank has a role in causing that?
The central bank, I think, makes things worse for the economy precisely when they try to fine-tune it. There's no way a handful of mandarins in Washington can manage an economy of 300 million people. They probably can't even manage their own family checkbook. But they're proposing to do that for the national economy, and it's extremely dangerous what Ben Bernanke has done now. Very, very dangerous.
Yeah. How would you handle the central banking, the Federal Reserve System, if you were able to somehow control it? Abolish it, or what would you do?
I think the central bank should just be in the business of a sound dollar backed by gold, or linked to gold, I should say, where the dollar has a fixed value, period. And if it goes above a certain price in gold, the Fed tightens up. If it goes below a price, it eases. That's all it should do. When you go to a supermarket, you buy a pound of meat. It is 16 ounces. It's not 18 or 12 or 10. When you say you'll be home in an hour, that means should mean 60 minutes in an hour, not 48 minutes or 96 minutes. So stable measures in value, stable measurements, weights and measures as they call them, those should be fixed and are fixed, except in money. And it used to be money linked to gold, but we've lost sight of it, and we've paid a dear price for it, and I hope it doesn't get much worse.
Yeah, Steve, I'm noticing lately a difference in the sense in how gold is linked to the dollar. It seems that the talk now is similar to yours, where what happens is the Fed increases or decreases the money supply to keep the gold price stable. But the old sense for the gold standard was you had X amount of dollars backing up each ounce of gold, and that was the fixed rate. So you're not in favor of that. You're more in favor of the stability of the gold price type thing?
Yes, I think experience demonstrates that having a stable price, let's say $1,500 an ounce, which would translate into a dollar being worth 1/1500 of an ounce of gold, is a positive thing. And what it does mean is that when your economy is vigorous and strong, the money supply will increase to meet the organic needs of the marketplace. And when the economy is stagnant, then the amount of money being created will be relatively low. So that's the key, have a stable value. If anyone's got a better thing than gold, let me know about it. I haven't found it yet.
Yeah, but that sounds like a backdoor Keynesian kind of view where you're increasing and decreasing the money supply.
No, it is the marketplace, people doing it. If you have a vigorous economy, needs more money, the price of gold will tell you whether you do meet that need. So gold is the barometer, gold is the measure, and gold responds to the market. So if you keep the price of gold steady, the money supply may go up or down depending on what the economy is doing, but it's not politicians do it, it's the market doing it.
Yeah, but when you use the term vigorous, that's sort of talking about aggregate demand, whether it's strong or weak.
You can have, economies that are vigorously growing. Japan, when the yen was fixed to gold between 1950 and 1975, Japan's economy grew very, very nicely. They moved up from a battered wartime economy to a very vigorous and global player of a major scale. Since the mid-1970s, they have profoundly lost sight of what made that initial burst, an impressive burst of prosperity, possible.
Mm-hmm. But what's wrong with just having a fixed rate between the number of dollars and the number of ounces of gold? What would be the problem with that?
It may end up either creating too much money. If, let's say you have 1,000 ounces of gold, and let's say you issued $1 million, $1,000 an ounce. I'm just using that to be simple.
Right.
So you have 1,000 ounces of gold, so you print up $1 million. That may be too much for the economy because you also have high tax rates, which is a depressing economic activity. Or it could be, if you have a vigorous economy, could be you're going to hurt it by creating distortions of not being enough money out there. So let the marketplace tell you. It will.
Yeah, but if you were to believe in supply and demand, whatever amount of gold is out there will just settle over the products out there, and you would have a price. That's how supply and demand works. So if there's, just, again, take a simple example, say there's 1 million ounces of gold in the United States, the prices would settle if everybody used gold, and whatever the price would be, it would just set based on supply and demand. I don't think there's a necessary quantity of money that is needed for an economy. The prices would just adjust, wouldn't they?
Well, what you don't want is unnecessary inflation or deflation. So again, steady value for money, like 60 minutes in an hour, just makes life a lot easier.
Yeah. Isn't deflation sort of a good thing? I mean, where we have it now is only where productivity is really moving fast because the Fed does print so much. But if you look at cell phones,
there's a whole world of difference between deflation caused by the central bank not providing enough money to meet the demands of the marketplace and productivity. Productivity is good. Prices should be coming down for things like cell phones and have. But when you have a vigorous, productive economy, it means you're going to need more money to conduct economic activities. As you know, economics is transactions between two willing parties.
Well, let's go on. If you were president and you had the ability to sort of end these departments, would you end the Department of Energy?
I think a lot of departments could go and be radically downsized. Education would be another one. Probably the Department of Labor, Department of Commerce, transportation, a whole bunch you could do without.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Now, what's your thinking on the military? Are we spending enough on military, or do we need more spending on military, or what's your thought?
The question is, what are you spending it on? We have a very inefficient procurement system, and I believe that when that should be reformed. That doesn't mean you're going to spend less. It just means you're going to get more for your resources. There's no reason why a weapon system should take 10 years to produce. That should be done in fairly quick order.
Mm-hmm. What is your view on the United States using the military in activities overseas? say, in Iran or what's going on in Afghanistan, what went on in Iraq, and what we may be doing in Syria?
Well, again, it depends on the circumstance.
Mm-hmm. What current circumstances?
Well, the current, which one? Iraq, Syria?
Take them in order. What about Afghanistan? Should we be in Afghanistan now?
Well, we are, and the question is,
right.
How do we get out and not harm things? And I'm afraid the Obama administration has signaled that it wants out at any cost, which means the bad guys are just going to wait, and they think they've won the conflict. And those who don't want the Taliban running the country are going to be left high and dry. So when you get into these things, you better think, what is your goal? What's it going to take to achieve that goal? And then don't keep changing your mind and end up having a lot of unnecessary bloodshed.
Yeah. Do you think the Taliban is a threat to the United States?
I think 9/11 proved that it is out to harm us. We better do something about them.
Yeah, but weren't those mostly Saudis that were involved?
The Taliban organization and the Taliban, which controlled Afghanistan at the time, gave those individuals the sanctuary to do the training and the wherewithal, the money to do what they did. If you finance people who are trying to hurt me, I'm going to come after you.
Why do you think they haven't attacked us in the United States since then?
Because they've tried and we've been able to thwart them. A lot of attempts have been made, and we should thank our lucky stars so far. It hasn't happened again.
What about Iran? Do you see a role for the United States attacking Iran or anything along those lines?
Well, nuclear-armed Iran would be not in our interest because, unlike the Soviet Union, they've made it clear they have this messianic complex, and who knows what they might do with it. They're not out to make energy plants. They've made it very clear they'd love to use a bomb and wipe Israel off the map. And their neighbors, the Saudis and others, are very fearful of a nuclear-armed Iran. And if Iran gets nukes, then those countries are going to get them. And it's just going to be a matter of time before one of them goes off.
Yeah, if Iran shot off just one nuclear weapon, if they had one, wouldn't the United States just pulverize them at that point?
If you think we should wait and let them wipe Israel off the map and then decide what to do about it, no. You make sure that possibility doesn't arise.
Yeah. I have completely different views for you on what the United States should be doing militarily outside the United States. But what's great about your book is you don't touch that subject at all. It's all about free markets and all that kind of stuff. And it's a great book, and I recommend it to everyone. It's called Freedom Manifesto: Why Free Markets Are Moral and Big Government Isn't. Again, thanks, Steve, for coming on the show.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Thanks for the words about the book, and keep fighting for liberty.
Yep.
Thank you. Take care.
You too. Thank you for listening. That's the end of this show. Be sure to check in every Sunday at 7 a.m. Eastern Time when a new show will be posted at economicpolicyjournal.com. Also, remember, check out my blog, economicpolicyjournal.com, every day. I post on the economy, I post on finance, I post on politics, and I post on liberty every day, 7 days a week. That's economicpolicyjournal.com. Don't miss it. Special shout out to Chris Rossini, executive producer of The Robert Wenzel Show, and also John Daubert, head of editing and mastering. See you and talk to you next week. Bye.